Good evening and welcome to Money Matters. My name is Jim Butler with Videre Wealth Management, and my co-host tonight is Dave Dewitt of Dewitt Capital Management. Hi, David.
Jim, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Well, we're always living in interesting times, aren't we?
I would say that's the truth.
So we thought we would have a conversation tonight initially before we get to our guest, a little bit about the global marketplace and specifically the energy industry.
Right.
Certainly energy is an area that affects all global markets, and in particular, the U.S. has gone through some pretty interesting changes over the past several months and few years.
Right.
Now, this is an area where you spend a lot of time and have some expertise. So why don't we start by just looking at the U.S. marketplace, and what do you see as the future of U.S. energy as a whole?
It's a great topic, and I think it'll affect a lot of people's investment decisions going forward, both globally and in the United States. Over the last 5 or 6 years, the United States has risen to being the largest producer of oil and liquids, petroleum products in the world, surpassing Saudi Arabia and Russia. Now, this is a surprise to a lot of people because it's happened sort of quietly. The MLP sector, Master Limited Partners, has been the conduit by which this has all occurred because they're the ones putting the pipelines in, the processing equipment, and the result of which is the United States is becoming energy self-sufficient. So that helps the economy, people, the drilling, the production. One of the areas that is produced when they drill for natural gas is ethane, and ethane is a component of ethylene, which is the basics of plastics. So manufacturing is coming back. We were 5 or 6 years ago when natural gas was at $15 or $16. We were looking to import natural gas. Those facilities are being reconverted to export natural gas. In Europe, the price is $15. In Japan, it's like $17. Here, it's $3 or $4. So we can actually export and make money. So it's great for the U.S. economy. It's great to see it happening, and it changes the geopolitical scene a lot. It means that we don't have to really get too involved with Venezuela or Iran or Iraq for oil.
Or less so.
Less so. But I think it's something that people have to come to terms with and understand that the dynamics have changed.
Right. You mentioned the price of natural gas being so low in the U.S. and much more expensive on the retail market in Europe. Why don't we just send all of our extra natural gas over there and make money off of that? Is it that simple?
I think, well, it requires approval processes and the presidential executive approval. So that might come whenever the executive branch of government gives it the okay. But there are a number of facilities already underway that are being, where we'll start exporting in probably 2016, 2017. Now this comes at a time when Russia, which really needs $100 a barrel oil to balance their budget and maintain their social programs when oil's at 80, and we don't know where it'll be, when it bounces all over the place. That's a problem for Russia. Venezuela is bankrupted without oil at these prices. So things change. In Saudi Arabia, the cartel, the OPEC cartel, could decide to not try to stop the price drop because they want to keep market share, or they may decide they want to prop up and they will restrain production. But the fact of the matter is the U.S. is now in the same seat sort of as they are. So we got geopolitical power as a result.
And our position is changing because we're not as dependent as we were as recent as 5 years ago.
We're not as dependent. We need, our refineries are designed to refine heavy crude, and that's Saudi Arabian crude. We're producing in the United States and Texas and North Dakota a lot of what they call light crude. It's almost like you can almost take it out of the ground and stick it in your diesel truck. Our refineries aren't really equipped for that. So if the government would enact a policy of letting us export light crude and import, we could have a balance, exporting light crude, importing heavy crude, but still be import neutral, and that would be a very smart decision for the government to make.
So let me segue that into investment opportunities for our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some investment strategies, even if they're general,
Sure.
as to how they might be able to capitalize on this, which will most likely continue to expand?
Right. I wouldn't say I'd be investing in oil per se. If we have extra supplies, it could mean generally lower prices. So investing in oil itself may not be the best bet. But if you invest in the companies that transport and the companies that process oil and natural gas in this country, as they try to get into new fields like North Dakota and Texas and parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania, to get the pipelines in, to get them working, to get all that going, that's all a challenge for the U.S. over the next 15 or 20 years. So if you invest in that area, I think you get steady income and steady growth, and that would be considered mostly master limited partnerships, which are a specific type of investment, has specific tax aspects, and
Right.
they should consult with their accountant.
Would that include natural gas as well as oil,
Both.
David?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with a little bit of digging, an investor can find opportunities right here without needing to go on a global marketplace.
Right. They provide income and growth. They've historically provided that in the past. So I think that now that the U.S. has got the oil and natural gas ready to go, we need more investing in this area.
Right, right. Well, that's a good segue into our question for the show.
Mm-hmm.
And we have John Martin of Marion, who has written in, what do you think about changing the law to allow U.S. to export oil?
Oh, boy.
Now, there's a loaded question.
Yeah, really.
Changing the law.
Yeah. Well, people think back to 1973 and 74 during the oil embargo, where some viewers may remember that if your license plate ended in an odd number, it was an odd day, an even day, so you couldn't go to the gas station 2 days in a row. So that's when we were, they could cut us off, and then we're in trouble. Those days are gone. So the issue that he's talking about is that why wouldn't we be able to export oil? And it makes all the sense in the world because we have too much of the light sweet, and we could export that in exchange for heavy crude, and it would make perfect sense. So it would be great for everybody if the law were to allow it. But legislators have to understand that things have changed. It's not 1974 anymore.
Right, right.
We're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's as much of a political battle as anything else.
Yeah. I think it's a political battle.
And not only do you have the U.S., but then you have the the international governments as well that need to be in agreement with that.
Yeah, I mean, some refineries in the world use light sweet crude, so why not ship it to them?
Right.
And we'll take somebody's heavy sweet crude, heavy sour crude.
Good. Okay. Thank you, David.
Sure.
And if you have a question, you can write that into Money Matters at 205 East Levering Mill Road, Ballackinwood, PA 19004, or you can email moneymatterstv@gmail.com. And now we have a very interesting guest this evening, a gentleman who has a great deal of experience in leadership training, and particularly he's here tonight to talk about leadership training for family businesses. Ron, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ron. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. So what is your background in leadership training and specifically within the family business arena, Ron?
I founded a company 25 years ago, Spinnaker Leadership Associates, to provide coaching for executives, top executives. And my coaching has been one-on-one with top executives for that period of time in a variety of kinds of businesses. All of our business comes from referral, so we don't control the kind of client that we see.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 5 to 10 years, it has become 80 to 90% family businesses, family-owned businesses. And now those family businesses have major decisions to make in how they move to the next generation.
So how would you describe to our listener who may not fully understand what a family business is, how would you define or describe a family business?
Good question. Privately held businesses are kind of easy to describe. It's a business that's held by investors or family businesses, business owners, and it's not public. A family business is kind of a mix between a private business and an independent proprietorship business.
Okay.
A family business is, I define it as a business that's owned by a founder and his descendants or her descendants, and or controlled by descendants of the founder once the founder is out of the business, and led by those people. Definition of a successful family business is a little different. That's a long definition by my standards.
Right.
It is something that where the business is owned by the descendants or the founder, and those people are committed to the success of the business, to grow the business, preserve and protect the business, and make it successful in the future. It also means that they demonstrate within the company, within the business, leadership of others. They demonstrate that they're not just part of the team, they are helping to lead the team. And finally, they have to show that the business is living at or below its earnings income potential so that it has positive cash flow and can succeed through generations. That's a successful family business.
I don't know much, but my hunch is that a family business that's still under the control of the first generation or the founder, as you say,
Right.
probably is the most successful phase. Is
Correct.
that true?
Mom and pop start a business, and when they do that, they invest everything they get out of the business back into it. And they live very modestly, and they try to keep the business growing. And that's a tough challenge. So that is the growth period of the business. As the second generation gets involved in that, if that happens, then you see a change in dynamics. Because the second generation has been living a little better than mom and dad, and they've been entitled a little more, and they expect more. So what's happening to the business over time is the cost of the family is growing and can grow faster than the ability of the business to pay for it. And that's one of the reasons that family businesses have a high failure rate.
Interesting. So you come into the equation where along the way? Early on with helping the business to continue on their growth path with that first generation? Or is it more in the transition?
The earlier the better. Because family businesses have a lot of decisions to make. You know, they're like any other type of business. They have all the external threats and challenges of regulatory, competitive issues, market issues, what the trends are, how to get labor installed. They have all those kinds of problems. But they have an additional problem when you have family dynamics. And those family dynamic issues are never well thought through. Someone founds a business and decides on his or her own that this is going to be a family business. It will employ my children for reasons that are usually wrong.
Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. Which part?
That are usually wrong.
For example, most family business founders have a big heart, and they view the business as an opportunity to provide jobs for their children. And also, they want that to happen so that they have continuity and control the business in the family versus the business control going somewhere else.
Right.
Those are the wrong reasons. Because what that means is they treat their children as special kids. They let them know that they're going to own the business someday. And when you do that, what reason does that child have to pursue his or her own career or to work hard for mom and dad? They don't have the same motivation that mom and dad did when they formed the company.
Right.
So what happens is they start to use the resources of the company instead of contributing back. And that has to be something under control to keep the company going, keep the business going. And that's a major issue for family-owned businesses.
What percentages of family-owned business in the second generation start running into trouble?
15% of family businesses survive to and through the second generation. 85% fail.
Wow.
That's a high failure rate.
Wow.
And what I've just described is one of the major reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership is another reason. Founders of small businesses, let's take a look at how they do that. They decide to have a business for some reason. They've got a product or a concept and they form a business. No one's looking over their shoulder to say, you're a great innovator, but you're a lousy leader. So they struggle with that in the beginning. They just wouldn't think about that. Why wouldn't it work? And they double up by working harder and longer and they make the commitment to make the business successful. They really do work very hard. And what they have to do instead is learn how to lead more effectively, to move from doing everything to thinking, planning, and communicating things that a leader would normally do. And that's something that's hard to learn when you're busy growing your business and fighting all the problems you've got to fight. That change has to occur. So they need leadership assistance. That's why the earlier the better to get involved in it,
Right.
to help them make that change. If they just can't make that change personally, then they should hire someone to lead their business. And typically that's something they don't want to do.
Well, you've used the term leadership succession planning
Right.
to refine this process that you're touching on. In
Right.
fact, you've written a book about that.
Right. I've written this book. It just issued recently.
Keep holding it up.
My hunch is, Ron, that teaching some folks about leadership is not very easy. This is not my area, so I'm not speaking from experience, but we've all had from school to business people that have leadership qualities and those that don't.
Right.
And the former are in a minority. So teaching
Right.
leadership skills has to be a very difficult task.
It is. At one time in my life, I was one of those leaders, and I didn't know how to lead.
Okay.
And I'm a slow learner, so it took my mentor 3 years to get that across. And so it is something you have to be patient about, but it's necessary. If you look at companies like Google, when they're formed and they're funded by venture capitalists, the venture capitalists insist on finding a leader. So Google was formed, and not very long after that, Eric Schmidt came in as a leader of the company, a professional leader. And that's something that family-owned businesses tend to not think about because they're viewing the family business as, I'm getting my children in here. I don't want a professional leader. They should install professional leaders in the interim until such time as they decide to involve their children and their children are fully qualified to run the business.
Now, if somebody has a child and there's an up and running business, what do you recommend for the child in terms of his career path?
That depends a lot on what the child's aspirations are.
Mm-hmm.
An example is that in my experience, 1 in 10 or less of second generation people want to work for or lead their parents' business. They're not interested.
Only 1 in 10
1 in 10 or less.
or less.
It's very common for me to talk with mom and dad, and they'll tell me that John or Mary want to run our business, and we're excited about that.
Yeah.
And then I talk with John and Mary, and they say, I want no parts of this. I want out of here.
Right.
I've actually had one example in my time that a man said to me, I have X number of weeks, days, and minutes until I can retire and I get out of here.
Yeah.
A second generation person. He was 25 at the time.
Oh boy.
He was counting down the time.
Clock watcher at age 25.
And I can call him anytime and say, how many days you got left? He's in that much pain,
Yeah.
but he won't tell his parents. He had ideas that he wanted to pursue, and he's put them aside. I think in fairness, what parents should do is think about themselves as not owning a business and exploring what their kids want to do with open eyes and ears. And whatever that is, that's what they should help them explore. And running their business should be the last thing they think about, but it's not, usually. It's first. They should give their kids a chance to be on their own, just as they founded their business on their own.
Right.
And that makes more sense. For the 1 in 10 kid that wants to run your business, that's exciting. And that should be pursued and supported. And a lot of leadership training and development should be given to those kids so they can do it well.
Yeah.
So can you identify what the key elements of leadership succession planning
Good.
are?
Yes. Leadership succession is usually given low priority, but it's one of the most important things a founder of a business should do, right from the beginning. There's no time earlier than that you can do it, and being late is not a good idea. Most people think about it as they go to their advisors, attorneys, accountants, advisors, and say, I want to talk about succession. That conversation drifts immediately to ownership transition, ownership succession. And then they start talking about trust funds and other things to transfer ownership if something happens to mom or dad. But transferring a business without identifying the leader and developing the leadership structure is giving an empty bag to the next generation, which will just implode. So ownership succession is about identifying all through the company who are the potential leaders of this company at every level. And the effective way to do that is to learn how to delegate very, very easily to all those people and challenge them to grow themselves and develop into potential leaders so you have more choices. And then go outside and look for leaders for your company.
Mm-hmm.
Don't focus on your children.
Right.
And I advise clients to send your children elsewhere. Let them go pursue a career. Let them go develop on their own. And if they come back and say, I want to work here and I want to lead this business, let them buy into that opportunity, not give it to them.
You know, it's interesting because in our business, David, we're more familiar, or I'm more familiar with those family businesses that have succeeded because you see them succeeding and they've moved on from maybe the second or the third generation. What we don't know about are the 85% that don't make it.
Right.
Right.
Well, they're not there to invest because they don't have the money because they're bankrupt.
Well, see what happens to our economy if that 85% could be successful.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And they want to be. They put the hard work in. But things happen. And introducing the second generation and the dynamics associated with that is difficult.
So what's the next step after leadership succession planning? Once you are able to get through that process,
Right.
then what?
Well, for example, then you could look at your ownership transition. What do you want? How do you want to handle that? And advisors typically say, almost all the time I hear this, put the business ownership into a trust fund. And I think that's terribly wrong. Trust funds are useful things, and you can avoid excessive estate taxes. But there are other ways to avoid those taxes that are perfectly fine. If you put the business in a trust fund and your kids start to get distributions from the trust fund, put yourself in that position. If you've got $1 million coming in from a trust fund, why would you work? Why would you want to work? And secondly, this one surprises most family business leaders, then you decide who's really your friend. And your trust fund checks are signed by the trustee. That person quickly is recognized as your cash supporter and becomes your real new BFF. And mom and pop are put aside. And mom and pop are very surprised by that. I tell them this is going to happen. And it happens, and they say, I didn't believe it.
BFF?
Best friend forever.
Okay.
I told a client once that your daughters are going to come to you after they've received 2 or 3 of these years of distributions from trust funds, and they were receiving millions of dollars. They're going to come to you and say, what have you done for me lately?
Ooh.
And he had one of his daughters get married, and at the reception, his other daughter said to him, that's my best friend over there, Jim, the lawyer who signs the checks for the distribution. It kind of delays and disrupts and destroys motivation. So it works against the founder of the company trying to get family involved in the business. I wouldn't do that. I'd find other ways.
How do you counsel business owners?
In what way, Dave?
Well, let's say you're talking to somebody who's in a situation, has a business, and he's got children that are probably in their 20s, and he's trying to figure out how to move this thing forward.
Right.
Now, you're saying most guys go to their advisors, they set up these trust funds and change ownership. But what would you be telling them?
I would tell them to start earlier.
What do you mean start earlier?
Talk with your kids when they're in their teens and 20s and
Right.
find out what they really want to do.
Mm-hmm.
If they tell you they want to play the violin or be a plumber or something else, and that has nothing to do with your business, support that and let them grow it. Help them grow it.
Okay.
Wawa is a good example. The person that's been running Wawa recently was not interested in running the business, and no one was interested in him. But he went out as an attorney and did other things and was doing the legal work for the company, and then realized the two of the company managers and he realized this is a good place for me to lead. And that works better. Come back here when you want to. Come back here when you're qualified.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece to that is don't wait until dad or mom shouldn't wait until they're in their 50s and 60s to make these decisions. They should do this early on by delegating through the company and developing leaders and identifying that we have a child or children that can run the business or we don't, and get the leadership succession piece in place. Let's say they hire a professional leader, and that's working well. That lets them start working on strategic issues instead of tactical issues, and gives them a chance to have a better work-life balance and enjoy their life while they're young enough to do it. Most people don't get serious about this until it's too late in their life. And that runs the risk of the leader dies, and there is no leadership succession plan. That happens very frequently, and they call me then and want me to help them with that. And they usually wait about a year and a half when the business has gone like this, because there's no identified leader. The siblings are arguing with each other about who should be the leader. They don't know what to do because they didn't know what dad or mom was doing before the demise, and the business goes sideways. If you go sideways, your competitors take the opportunity. That should be controlled.
So
Let's
you've
start
written
it
a book about leadership succession planning. Is it fair to say another book, or maybe your next one, is ownership succession planning?
Absolutely. It's already been drafted. It's probably published sometime next year.
Okay.
It's a very important element of the two pieces of succession, but it should come second. And my advice is going to be a little surprising to people, because when I'm doing one-on-one and we're talking about different ideas, that's one thing. But publish it and show that some of these things you've been doing are crazy and don't really apply, because we're talking about how it impacts the leadership motivation. That's the piece that's never considered. It has to be, or how can the company survive?
We're winding the show down at this
Okay.
point, and you've identified your current book and then the second one.
Right.
Briefly, are there other steps? Is there more to the process? I would think this is potentially very lengthy to help a business not only succeed from a leadership, ownership standpoint, but then progress to other levels. Is that
Right. We're
fair?
redoing our website right now to address all of the issues in categories that businesses face, family businesses or otherwise. So, for example, another issue is, how do you start a business? How do you structure the business, and why? It surprises me frequently how many people I talk with, and they have a business, and I say, what's your business structure? They don't know, or they say sole proprietorship. I tested this by talking to attorneys in the area where I live in Pennsylvania, and 5 or 10 of them I talked with said sole proprietorship. No one should have a sole proprietorship. It sounds easy, but it's not a good asset protection device.
so?
That's an example of other things we'll be doing.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.
We could continue this discussion for
discussion.
quite a while. And thank you for listening. Hopefully you have found this interesting. Tune in next week, and our guest will be Richard Natow, who's the CEO of the Prestige Group, and he will tell us about commercial real estate and the current marketplace. In the meantime, remember, your money matters. Thank you.